Two lawmakers from Staten Island are proposing changes to the grand jury process in light of the case that put their borough in the national spotlight. 1 week ago today, a grand jury voted not to indict NYPD officer Daniel Pantaleo in the death of Eric Garner. The no-bill decision came as a big surprise to many New Yorkers who saw the video of Officer Pantaleo restraining Garner and using a chokehold on him. Now, Senator Diane Savino is working on legislation to make the grand jury process more transparent, much like what we saw in Ferguson, Missouri. She's joining me from New York City now to discuss these proposed changes. Senator, welcome back to Capitol tonight.
Thanks, Liz.
So first, let us establish this. I believe that I read that you said that you felt New Yorkers had to trust the legal process here. So you did support what came out of the grand jury?
Well, I believe that, we are a system of laws, and we ask all of our citizens to have faith in our criminal justice system. And once they arrive at a conclusion, we're obligated to support the decisions that come out. That doesn't mean we have to understand them, and that doesn't mean that we may agree with them. What we saw in the Eric Garner case with respect to the grand jury in Staten Island is, as you pointed out in your opening comments, Liz, everybody across New York State was, quite frankly, surprised by the outcome. Because we'd all seen this video numerous times.
Yep.
And so there was an expectation that there would be some criminal charges coming forward. What they would be, was open to debate. There are some people who feel very strongly that, this was an intentional act. Others feel it was obviously not an intentional act. But they felt that there was something going to come forward from it. And when nothing did, that led to greater consternation. We ask people to believe in the criminal justice system because it's a basic principle of our democracy. But in order to do that, they have to feel that it's fair. And in this case, people don't believe that it was fair. And what's compounding that sense of disbelief is no one knows what went on in the grand jury. No one knows what the charges that they were asked to consider. No one knows what the evidence was. Because in New York State, you're not allowed to know.
Okay, so what you and Assemblyman Titone are proposing then is to try to have some built-in protections continue for individual jurors, because that's the argument against this, right? The idea is the secrecy has to be sacrosanct, so people feel comfortable in actually making decisions at the grand jury level and not having any retribution, for example. But you would see evidence that is presented to the grand jury released publicly, much like, as I mentioned, we saw in Ferguson.
Absolutely. And let's go back to what the grand jury statute says with respect to secrecy. That secrecy is absolute. And actually read it to you. Under Section 190.25 of the Criminal Procedure Law relating to grand jury proceedings, grand jury proceedings are secret, and no person may disclose the nature or substance of any grand jury testimony, any evidence, any decision, result, or other matter attending to a grand jury. If you were to do that, you actually would be subject to a Class E felony charge. That's how important the secrecy of the grand jury is considered in criminal proceedings. However, upon the completion of the grand jury process, and I think that's the most important component, Assemblyman Titone and I, we believe very strongly that the secrecy standard should remain in place during a grand jury proceeding for a whole host of reasons. But upon the completion, the information should be available for the public to be able to review it, and they may not agree with the outcome, but they should be able to see how the grand jury arrived at the conclusion that they did in an effort to understand the process and determine whether or not there's fairness in it. But you're right, we have to protect witnesses.
Right.
We have to protect grand jurors. We must maintain that secrecy with respect to who participated.
So the Staten Island DA, Dan Donovan, who happens to be a Republican, has said very little about all of this. He actually ran for State Attorney General. He's been on this show 4 years ago. So he has said very little. He did make a proposal, and it was granted to a judge, a state Supreme Court judge, that some of the information be released. It was very minimal. So do you believe he should have asked for more, for evidence to be actually released such that people could make the decisions that you're talking about for themselves? And also, should he have asked for higher or a lesser charge? We don't know exactly what he asked for. There are reports that he didn't ask for a lesser charge, and that perhaps might have been one of the reasons why the no bill result is what we saw.
Well, you're illustrating perfectly why we need to have transparency in the post-proceeding process, because we actually don't know. We're all speculating. You're seeing, unnamed sources telling different news outlets that Dan Donovan did this or he didn't do that. The fact is, we don't know. And in addition, Dan Donovan's not allowed to tell anybody what he did. If he does, he would be guilty of a Class E felony, so he's not going to commit a Class E felony just to satisfy people's curiosity. What he did is he followed the law post-proceeding. He said to a judge, you remember, in New York State, secrecy is absolute unless the district attorney makes a request to a judge requesting the release of specific pieces of information that came before the grand jury, again, at their discretion. So again, they get to choose what is released to the press, and then upon that application, a judge has to make a determination if there is a compelling public interest. So that judge could reject the DA's request and say there's no compelling public interest.
But your bill would allow DAs to release information about the evidence and testimony presented to grand jurors to the general public. Allow. I mean, there is nothing to compel a district attorney who may not be interested in actually revealing said information, right?
Now, we haven't written the bill yet, Liz, so the decision about mandating it or allowing it is something Assemblyman Titone and I are having a discussion about in consultation with other members, including, Senator Lanza, who is a former ADA. We want to strike the right balance. We're not looking to tie the hands of district attorneys, who we believe are doing the best they can dealing with cases like this. What we want to do, though, is find a way to restore the faith in the process to the members of the public. We want to make sure that people believe that there's fairness in this process.
Well,
and right now they don't feel that.
Are you speaking to DAs themselves about this? Because, the State Attorney General, who was on the show last night, was talking about how he would like to be, temporarily at least, have jurisdiction over civilian deaths at the hands of police officers, at least until the legislature makes a permanent reform. And he didn't speak to DAs before he did that, before he made that call. And the DAs, many of them, understandably, are quite angry and feel sort of chagrined by this whole situation. So are you taking into consideration their wishes?
Well, certainly we will consult with the DA's Association going forward. That's a very different set of circumstances, though.
True.
What the Attorney General is proposing is that he take over the role that is properly the purview of local district attorneys, which is prosecuting crimes in their jurisdiction. We're not seeking to usurp anybody's authority. We're simply saying upon the completion, when there's been a situation where a police officer has been there's a death or a crime that's being investigated with respect to a police officer, once it's done, allow the public to review the findings and make their own determination. Again, it may not change the outcome, but it will help restore people's faith in the system to see that it's fair. In addition, I would say in the past week, more people in New York State have talked about the concept of a grand jury than ever before in history. Unless you've come across a grand jury, you don't know what they do.
Right.
So part of this is an education process, so that people will understand what a grand jury is, why a grand jury is convened in certain circumstances and not in all circumstances. What are the potential charges that could be presented to a grand jury? How does a grand jury make those determinations? Right now, people don't know that. And so when they don't know something, they make it up to satisfy a narrative that they are then comfortable with.
So, Senator, do you disagree then with what the Attorney General has proposed? Just to close the loop on that?
Well, whether I agree or not, I actually haven't had a conversation with him myself, so I'm not sure what he's proposing. My understanding of the law, though, Liz, is that I believe the governor has the power through an executive order to establish the office of a special prosecutor if he wants to.
Right.
So I would think, the Attorney General should be speaking to the governor about what role he would play if the governor, chose to do this. Well, I think we have enough things that require legislative change.
Yeah.
That are going to be hard enough to get through the Senate and the Assembly. Where we don't have to change the law, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So the Attorney General has requested executive action from the governor, but some of your legislative colleagues, particularly in the Assembly and also the Senate Democrats, are saying, let's appoint a special prosecutor going forward in perpetuity. The AG is saying, well, at least in the interim, give it to me, and then you can drop it. So that is a little bit of a distinction.
Well, again, I think they should make that application to the governor, and if the governor agrees with them, he'll do it. If you know, I believe that when and Mario Cuomo was governor, I believe he established the Office of Special Prosecutor.
He did. We're out of time, but
he didn't seek legislative authority.
He did not. No. I do want to just ask you one final question. New York City has been seeing protests since this decision came down from the grand jury. I know you expressed some frustration with these protesters on Staten Island. Has that cleared up? Are you? I mean, is that still a problem?
No, let me just say this clearly. I'm all for protest. I think it's one of the most important fundamental rights we have as Americans. And the very protesters who are out there demanding change, and some of them are, peaceful and some of them not so much, they're being protected in their exercise of their fundamental rights as American by the very people they're protesting against. And I think that's probably one of the things that makes us all uniquely American. I did draw the line the other day, though, on a group of protesters who walked out into the middle of the Staten Island Expressway, which is an interstate highway, and it is only by the grace of God, Liz, that nobody was killed. That kind of stuff is unacceptable. It's one thing to protest, to make your voice heard, to demand change. It's another thing to take other people's lives and put them in danger when you're deciding that you want to do this. And that's the potential for a multi-vehicle accident on an interstate highway, the potential for jackknife tractor trailers. The Staten Island Expressway right now it's undergoing a major reconstruction project, so you already have narrowed lanes, you have workers on site there. Just the possibility that people could have been seriously injured or killed is unacceptable.
Well, and we have seen, remarkably, after all these protests, only several hundred arrests, according to the NYPD. So mostly peaceful, as you mentioned, but certainly there have been some exceptions. And we've seen it across the state as well. Senator, we are out of time. I want to thank you very much. We'll see you in Albany soon.
Yes, we will. Thanks, Liz.
Be well.